From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today I'll be reviewing the movie The Witches, released in 1990. Starring Angelica Houston, Mai Zetterling, and Jason Fisher. Directed by Nicholas Roeg. Genre: adventure, comedy, fantasy. Rating: PG. Budget: not available. My rating is an 8.6. The synopsis is: an orphaned boy, Luke, who lives with his grandmother, encounter a group of witches who plan to turn all of the little children of the world into mice. Enjoyment: I really liked this charming story. I loved that it had so many creature designs, but it kept a very dark and funny edge to it. It's one of my favorites. Pacing, with an hour and 30 minutes, it went by really fast. It's got good pacing, but there are some really boring parts too, especially in the beginning when they're setting up the story. It really pays off though. However, it does take a while before the story really gets going. The story is an adaptation of a book of the same name, written by the famous author Roald Dahl, responsible for many classic books adapted to film, many of which you probably know of. Unfortunately, Dahl wasn't always happy with these adaptations, and this film was no exception. Dahl did not like these changes, and ever since that film, he had specific requirements in his will for future adaptations of his work. There's no telling how different the film would have been if it had followed the book exactly, but the story still works. At least it still works for me. It's not a perfect story, and there are quite a few plot holes, but it's unsure whether it's from the changes that they made to the film or to the book. It's just very difficult to translate a book into a film. Now the challenge in this film are the witches. They're the biggest challenge here, and their plan to get rid of all children. The film plays upon the typical misconceptions about witches in a classic fairy tale manner. That evil woman mischievously working in secret to destroy all children. But as we know today that, witches are not always like that. That's just a little fairy tale to scare children. But it's actually an enjoyable depiction that's full of whimsy and fun. The film builds up a great reason for the witches to hate children too. I mean, their very presence is so disturbing to the witches. The children actually smell like dog droppings to them, and it repulses them to be around them. As of now, the witches have been able to get at least one child or two a week, but the leader of all of the witches, the Grand High Witch, is not happy with that at all. She has come up with a plan to eradicate them by turning them into mice with her magic formula 86, playing on the term 86, meaning to get rid of. In the book, it's revealed that part of the plan involves parents and other adults eventually killing the mice who were once children. It's the darker edge that the book actually lends to the story. I find it very fascinating. It's a very juicy plot, I think. The plan is roundabout because the witches are actually smart villains. They don't want the children to die and leave evidence to expose themselves. And, we all know what happens to witches when they get caught. The details about the witches in the story are wonderfully told in the classic fairy tale format too, with a grandmother telling a story to her grandchild about the witches. And what she says about the witches is that they look like ordinary women. They're actually hideous underneath their disguise. They wear wigs because they're bald, and they wear square-toed shoes because they have boxy feet where toes should have been. And they wear gloves because they have ugly claws for hands. But once disguised as a normal woman, the best way to notice them is by the purple hue in their eyes. What a wonderful bit of detail there. I just love that stuff, and that's all coming from the book, and the film translates that beautifully. As we see in the film, there is a witch that turns good, and much of her physical disfigurements are reversed with normal hair, feet, and hands. It seems the degree of evil doings coincides with the hideousness of the witch, and the most hideous and evil witch is the Grand High Witch. And the Grand High Witch is a fantastic character with charisma and an over-the-top sense of drama. She is your stereotypical witch to the 15th power. From her is where we get the most scares, if there are any, and believe it or not, comedy. Seeing her speak to the convention of witches from all over the world really is a sight to behold, as she goes through a range of emotions from whimsy to intimidation, frustration to glee, anger to confidence. The most comedic moments seem to come from the transformation process that her character endures as she conceals her hideousness in a perfect female body. Her human guise is Miss Ava Ernst, posing as the chairwoman from the Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the perfect name for an organization that means to do the exact opposite. Now, the empathy. Man, I really liked Luke and his grandmother. Luke is an orphan living with his grandmother, who has been very upfront about the existence of witches, and in fact has had an encounter with some at some point in the past, which results in the loss of her pinky finger. Grandmother says that she has been searching for the Grand High Witch but has never found her, and the Grand High Witch reciprocates that sentiment as she reveals that the grandmother is an old adversary of hers. This is a mysterious story that's somewhere lurking in the background of the tale, and you never really hear the full story, but it's kind of nice that it's just there. We don't need a flashback or anything, but it's really a nice touch to let us know that the grandmother knows so much about the witches because she's been sort of a warrior over the years. Luke is such a cute little boy. When they move to England, he encounters the head witch there, and she unsuccessfully tries to nab him. Luke gets 2 mice for his birthday as a bit of foreshadowing of Luke actually being turned into a mouse later on in the story. Now, while training his mice for the circus, Luke is trapped in a conference room at a hotel with all the witches of England, while the Grand High Witch reveals her plans, and that is how he gets into such trouble with the witches. First, Luke witnesses the witches demonstrate their formula on Bruno, which turns him into a mouse. And then the witches discover that Luke knows their plan. They capture him and turn him into a mouse as well. After he is turned into a mouse, he gets to be more likable, becoming the hero with a responsibility to stop the witches from succeeding in their plan. Luke comes up with a very delicious scheme of his own, no pun intended, to stop the witches by slipping the Formula 86 into their celebration dinner at the hotel. It turns out their cress soup will be the perfect carrier for the formula. The relationship between Luke and his grandmother is so sweet and endearing. They make such a great team, and you can really sense how much they trust each other. Even though Luke is a kid, his grandmother allows him to be himself and has faith in him completely. The technical aspects. Technically this movie is kind of a marvel to me. There's so many awesome moments, but a couple moments where the ball was completely dropped. In the conference room, it seems as if most of the witches in the meeting are men in women's clothing, which is an interesting choice because in the beginning of the movie, it clearly states that the witches look like ordinary women. They don't look like men dressed as women. They look like women. Even though that was a misstep, I rather like some of the film's other aspects, their other special effects, especially the practical effects. In case you didn't know, this was one of Jim Henson's productions, and no expense was spared for details on the creature effects. Besides doing a fantastic job with the Grand High Witch, there was a very fine adventure with Luke as a mouse as he gets the Formula 86 from the Grand High Witch's room in the hotel, and also getting that formula into the hotel's kitchen and into the soup. Technically, that was a very fine job, and it was very creatively done. When Luke and Bruno are transformed into mice, the mice are played by a combination of real rats, not mice, and the most adorable puppets I've ever seen. Jim Henson's Creature Shop created 3 different sizes of the puppet mice and built scaled-down sets to match them. And you can see the care that went into putting these creatures together. It was very well done, and they hold up pretty well over time. They're not perfect, but I think that they look pretty good. The cinematography is very interesting in this film. Some of it is really good, and then some of it is really off, like strange, weird close-ups, and sometimes the close-ups give a sense that something was wrong, and a trippy hallucinogenic scene. Very disorienting, very surreal, and I understood where they were going with that. However, there were a few, not a whole lot, but a few moments where the camera just wasn't really tracking what it should have been tracking, or it should have been on a tripod and it was just moving around too much. I really enjoyed the costumes and makeup for all of the witches in this film. They did a fantastic job translating the description of the witches from the book to the screen. I especially loved the creature effect makeup for the Grand High Witch. It was so astounding and grotesque at the same time. It was just really fascinating to watch that character live on screen. It's something you just can't take your eyes off of. Now for the performances, wow. Angelica Houston killed that role. She murdered it. That was an amazing performance. I absolutely loved it. I loved everything that she gave to that character. And it was over the top. It was incredibly hammy. It was big. It was obnoxious. And I loved it because I just loved that performance. I can't describe it any better, but it was wonderful. Now, it turns out that she had been Dahl's personal favorite to take the role. As far as the sacrifice, I mean, that makeup, she's in that makeup, and it's absolutely astounding. They said that it took about 8 hours of makeup to transform her into the Grand High Witch, and it looks it. The detail is absolutely astounding. Mai Zetterling was excellent as the Grandma Helga, and she was endearing and sweet and a little spicy. And Jason Fisher playing the role of Luke. In the beginning, he wasn't that effective, but I think something happened towards the end of the film where he really came to his own and really took on the role as Luke, and I started to believe that he was that character. I also felt that his voice work was very, very good. Once he became the mouse, it was so adorable, and my heart just jumped out and said, I really felt for his character. The best part of the film for me was the ending scene with all of the witches together eating the soup. I really enjoyed that scene a lot. The wish list. My wish list for this movie, I wish they had more money to do more with this film and really smooth out the rough edges of this film, like getting proper extras and having a more fluid cinematography. Things like that would have elevated the film. Now, the ending. The film studio actually shot an ending that was more faithful to the book, and they of course test screened the film with a happy ending, and the test audiences chose the happy ending. And I have to say that I actually cried a little bit when Luke and his grandmother were going to sleep and seeing her eyes welling up, knowing that he didn't really have very long to live and she was going to lose her grandson forever. It kind of was relieving to know that everything was going to be okay. It was a feel-good movie. It was supposed to be terrifying and a scary movie, but it ended up being a comedic, feel-good movie. In summary, this movie reminds me of a lot of movies, actually. It reminds me of that Hansel and Gretel movie, Witch Hunters, that came out in 2013, where they had the head witch Muriel and her kind of creation and all those other witches that they had kind of gathered, and they had this huge fight at the end of the movie. This film feels like it could be the source material for the special effects makeup for the witches. This movie, it's pretty good. It's dark, it's silly, it's surreal, a campy tale reminiscent of films like A Company of Wolves and Gremlins. Just a wacky, kind of funny film. Horror comedy. I don't understand how this works, but it's a horror comedy and I laughed my butt off. The first time I saw this movie, I was 20 years old. At 20, I enjoyed it and picked up on it right away. I've liked it ever since. It's been a little guilty pleasure of mine. I seem to have a lot of them, but yeah, it's a great movie in my opinion. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it, and please be sure to subscribe to this channel. I'll be posting many more reviews, and let's keep this discussion going. Leave your rating for the movie and why in the comment section. And also please let me know if there are any movies you would like me to review. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.